We label ourselves a lot in modern life, don't we? Based on our preferences, sexuality, gender expression, race, political beliefs. But have we ever asked ourselves, does it benefit us at all? What labels have merits and which ones do not? Brace yourselves, for I'm going to ramble about it. To make it clear first, I can see why various labels can be appealing or even useful, and I'm not trying to call anyone stupid for using them at all. While I prefer to avoid using majority of modern social labels, and I'll explain why near the end of this video, I still use some for the reason that they are strictly informational for the rest of society in the most essential ways. Like saying I'm a woman and, biologically speaking, female. Imagine dating while trying to avoid using those. They communicate what my role in the biology of the reproductive process is. It's very useful to know for pairing up with someone for the purpose of procreation. Same with sexuality, at least the most basic categories. In circumstances of trying to partner up, it's most essential for other people to know whether you're into guys, ladies, both, or neither. The label of adult versus a minor is also very important because it dictates how not only other people but the law itself should treat you in most situations and how much freedom to decide over yourself you have. Those are things that you shouldn't obscure or misrepresent if you want your social life to be healthy. But even categorizing yourself in those ways can sometimes backfire on you. That's when in someone's brain the definition of a category is expanded to include things that aren't or shouldn't be absolutely universal for members of that category. I'm talking stereotypes. There will be people who will think, you're a woman, so you shouldn't have ambitions beyond raising a family, or you're a boy, so you can't like pink and play with dolls, or even you're gay, so you have to be promiscuous or sexually deviant. Now, those are mostly old people stereotypes, but you get the idea. You're being assumed to be a certain way because of belonging to a group sharing a characteristic. And people assume that because it's something they either learned from information sources available to them or only ever saw a certain flavor of a person within those categories and didn't quite process that just because some people do fit the stereotype, it's not productive to assume things like that about a person you newly met. Now you probably see how the labels might bring harm in that way. Harm that is sometimes unavoidable. You might say that the assumptions are harmful and therefore we should just teach people not to assume. And there is truth to that, but we also need to consider that assuming things is a part of how our cognitive processes assess the world around us. Getting to know everyone on a very personal and detailed basis isn't a very viable way to navigate society. You can afford disgrace to your family and your close circle of friends, but how many conversations about nuance and philosophy will you have with your grocery store cashier or the neighbor across the street? You're just going to assume things based on their presentation or labels they chose to briefly disclose, because your brain likes to at least pretend that it knows what's going on in your surroundings. So what you present to the outside world will affect how you're treated by people you have no personal relationship with. Yes, I agree that we should challenge stereotypes, but we can't really completely remove them, especially if you don't want to wage war on people displaying the stereotypical behavior in the first place. Which would be a barrel of toxicity on its own, because trying to force people to conform to a different behavioral pattern just so you don't get stereotyped after them is a breach of everyone's personal freedom. If stereotypes are formed through repeated observation of similar behaviors or traits in people sharing a label, they are largely out of our control unless we want to propagandize the entire society to stop doing what they're doing and be more like what you want your label to be viewed as. And that would be rude, so what can you do? This, in particular, I assume, is the question that might have given birth to the rise of less informative labels, for example in terms of gender. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the term non-binary and others under that umbrella were created by people who felt uncomfortable with the stacked cultural expectations that labels of man and woman became associated with. That's also what Google said it was. Those terms, however, don't give you the crucial information that initial gender terms indicated. Like what would be your role in procreation and what sexual dimorphism characteristics you are looking for in a partner when paired with your sexuality label. And people using them often even try to obscure people's ability to assume that information from their physical appearance, trying to be perceived as more androgynous. What those labels actually do for the people who use them is to serve as a call of don't enforce gender roles upon me, actually get to know me to learn what you should expect from me. Unfortunately, as we see from current political climate, at least within the US, that attempt to shed cultural expectations didn't go very well, because the label that was supposed to give you a clean slate from gender-related assumptions, as it becomes more recognized and pushed for in the mainstream, gained a stereotype of its own. And thanks to some celebrities and activists overly leaning into the queer aesthetic and loudly making a show of how weird or disturbing they can behave while still being cheered for, that stereotype started to become something amongst the lines of crazy and delusional people, which obviously started hurting more average folks that go by this label, who just want to exist and not be pressured to conform to cultural norms associated with genders that are based in human sexual dimorphism. And so I think that just like with the non-binary concept, attempt to create a stereotype-free label is, sadly, futile. Because the more the label is used and heard about, the more people will try to narrow down on the pattern of what a person claiming a certain label looks like and behaves like. Why are human brains like this? Constantly trying to find commonalities between people sharing a certain label, beyond the one commonality that the label is actually trying to highlight? I honestly don't know. We just like to have our worlds mapped in our neat little patterns. On a sillier example, some people will even try to psychoanalyze you based on what pizza you like the most. Have you ever tried Googling what's your favorite pizza says about you? There's plenty of articles on that. Do they have any merit? Perhaps in personal experience of someone who writes stuff like that it does, even if the correlation is subtle. Each person has a very limited sample size of people that they actually know and can compare with each other. But that doesn't mean nothing for wider society. Though, not gonna lie, this pineapple pizza lover description is totally on point for me. But if fighting a stereotype is pointless and creating new labels to make people think outside the box just makes them create a new box for you, that may or may not be more influenced by over-exaggerated media representation than what you actually are like, how do you just live your life being yourself? I'll be honest and I'll say I don't know if I know the best answer. But how I've been going about it is just give people the absolute minimum of labels to segregate me into. Absolute minimum of opportunities to add additional expectations upon those labels. Make them feel like they don't really know me unless they actually look at my individual case, how I live my life. And above all, be assertive so I can punch a hole in their imaginary box whenever it doesn't actually suit me. I'm aware that it's just a schematic that people create to navigate more shallow interactions in their life, and I'm not a faulty specimen for not conforming to it. I'll gladly let people open my jars because I have noodle arms, But if anyone would try to claim that I must struggle to think logically because I'm a woman or something, I'll write a whole argumentative essay on a given topic if proving the person wrong is of any significance to my goals. And if they're not standing in the way of my goals, then whatever, man. They can think what they want as long as they're not in power to become relevant in my life. Think, for example, political labels. I honestly struggle to comprehend why so many people are eager to put one-word political descriptors in their About Me pages of social media profiles. Like Democrat, Liberal, Conservative, or Republican. If you do that, all you achieve is getting people who don't identify as your label to either refuse to check your content at all based on good old rule of tribalism, or check it with extreme prejudice and look for reasons to mock you about it before they even know what you said. And I bet that whatever general political alignment that you feel you belong to also has at least some policies that you yourself would consider flawed or harmful. You might end up having your political identity being strawmanned by others based on something dumb one or other politician said that's in your camp. I feel like it's much more productive to just ditch those labels and have discussions on politics on one policy basis. Because not even two conservatives or two liberals think the same about every single issue. And without disclosing your broad tribal identity in politics, if you even need one, you're not creating prejudice in the person you're discussing with. That would create an opportunity to gather best points from all sides and form more mature political movements for the future, instead of being forced to just pick a side with all of its dirt included, and defend it regardless of the dirt. We shouldn't have to defend dirt just to proclaim our loyalty to another idea of the same political party. And if you do need to shout out your blanket political identity to random strangers who you're not willing to have discussion about politics with, why? Why are we, for example, rallying for politicians or parties and not policies? Just kidding, I know why. It feels good to belong to a community, even if it's not a perfect fit. Humans are tribal creatures. But if we don't evolve out of that and start analyzing the world in a bit more detail, we'll just allow leaders of political structures to divide us instead of holding them accountable for harmful policies on individual basis. On that example, you can probably already see why I consider some labels like this that people use to be in general more harmful than beneficial for interpersonal interactions to disclose. This applies to not only politics, but any label that tries to communicate things that should not be communicated or discussed without nuance. Generalizing yourself into clubs or tribes based on those labels can alienate you from people who might still share a lot of your values, but have negative feelings about the group you claim to be a part of, based on some actions of the worst individuals in that group. It also closes the door for debates and exchanges of views that could lead to finding flaws in one another's philosophies and perfecting them little by creating starting bias in a conversation. Judging a group by its worst participants is another reason of why I refuse to label myself on aspects that aren't really necessary to know for someone who isn't already somewhat close to me. For example, I draw a lot of animals, and since I suck at drawing humans to a large degree, I've always expressed my creativity in drawing through animal characters with anthropomorphic expressions. Now, what would you assume about me if I said I was a furry? Think about it, because in its most far-reaching definition, I could potentially fit into a fandom built around anthropomorphic animals. But on the other hand, I don't have any interest in role-playing an anthropomorphic animal or going to conventions wearing a fursuit. I don't even consume much of the media that is targeted at that fandom either, unless as a byproduct of my interest in drawing. My choice of a Milksnake as a channel mascot is purely because I think those animals look cool, and if I chose to draw myself as a human character, it would just look ugly, just as when I try to draw my arc human character in my thumbnails. Also, I would really like a pet Milksnake. Perhaps if the channel pops off, my family will tolerate me adding a Milksnake to the household to match the brand. Anyways, as you see, any stricter understanding of a furry label doesn't fit me, even though technically enjoying and creating media with anthropomorphized animals could be considered enough to fit into that group. I certainly have very little in common with what non-furry people think of when they hear a furry. So what would be the benefit of identifying myself as that to a wider public that I can't specify anything to? Especially considering that for a significant enough portion of the people identifying as furries, it's also a sex thing, and I don't want people to be able to go that far in assumptions about me before I can clarify that I just draw animals with cartoony facial expressions. While I don't hold the view of all furries are perverts and weirdos, I don't want to limit my social circle based on how cringe does one perceive cosplaying as a cartoon animal, because that's how people interpret that label on first impression. In the end, avoiding labels we don't absolutely have to adopt and they're not assigned to us by our outer appearance might be the only reliable path of avoiding ourselves getting stereotyped. At least if we do not want to be. Because some people don't mind embracing and embodying the stereotype of their label, and if that's what they want, more power to them. But if you aren't that, and people stereotyping you upsets you, consider following the advice I have for you from now on, so you can limit people's ability to assume things about you that aren't in line with how you want to be perceived. Be mysterious. If you don't 100% identify with what common culture sees as a certain community, don't slap their labels all over your profiles and clothes, even if you interact with them on a daily basis due to a couple of commonalities. Don't broadcast labels about your identity that you know might be misinterpreted, and people will be forced to actually talk to you and get to know your personality, stances, and values in detail if they're curious enough to know you as a person, instead of dismissing you with, "Oh, it's just another one of those guys." The more we force each other to think and get to know people instead of prejudging them based on a generalization, the more, hopefully, our culture will move away from assuming things first and not even asking questions later. It would be a nice future, wouldn't it? If you also share my views on that topic, or you think my take is at least reasonable, please give the video a like and drop a subscription so you can hear more of my rambles. And if you have a different take, please share it with me in the comments section. I'm very interested to hear how other people view this issue. As for now, I'll be wrapping up this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!